The Woman in Black by Peter Hackett. The annual audit had taken all day and most of the evening. Geoffrey Lane closed the last ledger at 15 minutes to 10, rang his wife to explain why he was so late, and then went round to the little Italian restaurant, where he ate a small steak and drank 2 glasses of wine. Finally, he caught the 5 minutes past 11 train from Fenchurch Street Station, settling back in the corner seat of the 4th carriage from the front. Worn out by the day's events, he closed his eyes and slipped into the dark mists of sleep. He woke up with a start and at once became aware of a wet, clammy coldness that seemed to drain the strength from his limbs and send a wave of inexplicable apprehension across his brain. Then he saw the old lady. She was dressed entirely in black. A long black cape lay in bulky folds over the seat and reached down almost to the top of her shiny black shoes. The tasselled ends of a black silk scarf hung over her shoulders, and thin fingers, covered with matching leather gloves, held the cloak in position over her shrunken breast. A large black hat that bore some resemblance to an old-fashioned bonnet completely obscured her face. She swayed back and forth as the train raced through the night, her face turned to the window, staring out into the impenetrable darkness. Geoffrey looked at his wristwatch. The first stop was at Benfleet, and they were not due there until 12:13. The time now was 11:40. As the carriage had been empty when he had got in at Fenchurch Street, where on earth had the old lady come from? He could only assume that while he had been asleep, the train had stopped at Barking. On reflection, he decided this could be the only explanation. But he could not dismiss the notion that there was something wrong about that gently swaying figure. Apart from the antiquated style of dress, he seemed to detect a kind of, what was it? Lifelessness. A rigidity that rightfully belonged to a wax model. Or, and the thought flashed unbidden across his brain, a corpse. The silence, broken only by the rattling chatter of the moving train, became oppressive, and he knew he must say something, anything, if his imagination was not to go wandering into a dark country. Geoffrey slid his cigarette case from his jacket pocket, and after glancing at the no smoking sign, called out in a voice that was unnecessarily loud, "I beg your pardon. Do you mind if I smoke?" The figure became still, but the head did not turn or display the slightest sign that his question had been heard. He decided to try again. "Excuse me, do you mind if I smoke?" Again, there was no response. Perhaps she was deaf, or frightened at being so addressed by a total stranger. But the urge to make some kind of conversation, no matter how frivolous, became irrepressible. Without waiting for the requested permission, he lit a cigarette and sent a ring of smoke across the carriage. "I often travel on this line late at night, and I know it's a bit off-putting when people insist on talking. But at the same time, it can be rather uncomfortable when they don't." Was it his imagination, or had there been the slightest suggestion of movement, a quiver of the head, the merest jerk of the shoulders? The meaningless words continued to roll off his tongue. "And if one doesn't say something, all manner of thoughts come into being. I said to my wife." The head jerked round, It was as though a button had been pushed, a string pulled, or the last word had triggered some hidden mechanism into sudden action. It was then that the 11:40 from Benfleet roared past on the upline, pushing a wedge of air against the train with a heavy crunch. The frantic diddly-da, diddly-da of two trains travelling in opposite directions mixed their thundering rhythms, and a wall of sound crashed in around him as black terror came shrieking across the lighted carriage. Geoffrey was looking at a dead white face in which the eyes were gleaming pools of fire-tinted madness, and the skin was stretched tightly over a framework of bones. The black lips parted in a ferocious grin. Even in the midst of his brain-freezing terror, he realised that once it had been a beautiful face. In fact, if the eyes were to lose that flame of madness, the mouth that awful grin, youth and beauty would not be all that far away. Her appearance of advanced age was the result of experience, not the passing of years. Minutes sped by as he gazed upon that face of horror, looking into the blazing eyes, and felt the clammy coldness grow more intense. Then the clenched teeth parted, and a harsh whisper came rasping across the carriage. He lost his head. The roaring clatter of the passing train suddenly ceased. The overhead lights flickered and went out, and Geoffrey Lane threw back his head, opened his mouth, and screamed. He came back to consciousness in an empty, lighted carriage, and sat perfectly still for an entire minute, while he tried to remember, to consider, to understand. Memory returned on reluctant feet, and with it came a mental picture of a dead white face, with mad bright eyes and bared teeth. Understanding arrived a little later. He had seen a ghost. There was absolutely no manner of doubt in his mind. A ghost, an apparition, a time image, call it what you like. He had seen it, felt the clammy coldness that was as much part of its make-up as the black cloak, the bonnet, the tasselled scarf. And, heaven preserve him, he had heard it. Reaction began to take its toll. He began to shake violently. Sweat ran down his face, and there came to him the certain knowledge that he was terribly, horrifyingly alone. Shut up in a small metal box that was hurtling through the night at 60-odd miles an hour. He glanced up at the communication cord, and once even reached up a trembling hand towards it. Then he slowly withdrew it, and huddled back in his corner of the carriage as he accepted the bitter truth. The seer of ghosts is never believed, particularly by a guard of a suddenly halted train. But he would get off at the next station, wheresoever it might be, and trust to luck that he would catch a late bus or hire a taxi for the remainder of the journey. Chalkwell station was shrouded in darkness. Geoffrey Lane staggered along the deserted platform, dimly aware that his legs felt like sagging rubber, and that now he was out in the open air. A nasty red mist was obscuring his vision and threatening to bring him to his knees at any moment. He came to the tiny square of light that pinpointed the ticket collector's box, and it was here that the returning weakness had its way with him, for he suddenly swayed and then sank down in the little open gateway. A tall man, with rimless glasses and a slim pencil-lined moustache, looked down at him with an almost comical expression of grave concern. His deep voice was friendly, sympathetic, but above all, human, alive. "Gracious, sir, let me help you up. Are you ill, or—" He did not finish the sentence, but Geoffrey knew the missing word had been drunk. Assisted by the man's outstretched hand, he clambered to his feet and leaned against the ticket box. "No, I've had rather a nasty shock." This was surely the understatement of all time. "But if I could rest somewhere for a few minutes, I'll be all right." "Of course, sir. Let me help you into the office. There won't be another train for half an hour, and I always make myself a cup of tea about this time." Geoffrey was assisted into a small green-painted room, equipped with an oil stove, 2 battered-looking armchairs, and a solid deal table. The ticket collector dropped 2 tea bags into a brown teapot, then eyed a singing kettle which sat upon the oil stove. "This nasty shock. Something personal, was it, sir? Bad news, maybe?" "No." Geoffrey wiped his moist forehead and succumbed to the overwhelming urge to tell his story. The fellow would probably think he was mad. "As a matter of fact, I don't expect you to believe this. I saw a ghost on the train." The ticket collector poured boiling water into the teapot, replaced the kettle on the stove, then nodded gravely. "That'd be the woman in black, no doubt." Geoffrey stared up at the man with sagging mouth and bulging eyes. "You know about her?" The ticket collector poured tea into 2 china mugs, then added milk from a half-full bottle. "Sugar, sir?" Geoffrey nodded. "Yes, 2 spoonfuls. You've a sweet tooth, sir. Same here. Now, you drink that down and you'll soon feel yourself again. Nothing like sweet tea when you've had a bit of a shock." "You know about her?" Geoffrey repeated. The ticket collector nodded very slowly, as though admitting to a deplorable weakness. "That I do. I've heard about her for more years than I care to remember, although I've never seen her myself. But a lot of people have, and they can't all be liars or madmen. It's rather sad, really." "Sad?" Geoffrey exclaimed. "Yes, sir, sad. Imagine a pretty child who grows up to be a beautiful woman, who then becomes a ghost on a train out of Fenchurch Street. Don't you think that's sad?" Geoffrey nodded and took a deep swig from the mug. Then he asked the obvious question. "I suppose there's a story?" The ticket collector chuckled. "There sure are, sir. Of course there is. Can't have a ghost without a story, can you now?" He paused and looked reflectively at the little red window on the oil stove. Her name was Clara Bowman. Geoffrey was feeling much better. The train was now miles away, and the experience seemed to have happened in a different time dimension. And now he was inclined to be jocular. "Suits her," he said. "You're right there, sir," the ticket collector agreed. "A fine upstanding wench. Came from a good family, and met up with a young fellow from down Benfleet way. Got herself into trouble, if you follow my meaning. Terrible thing back in those days. Particularly as he was by no means acceptable to her family. Well, they ran off together, meaning to get married in Southend and spend their honeymoon at Thorpe Bay. Ever been there, sir?" Geoffrey said he hadn't, and waited impatiently for the rest of the story. Lovely place, particularly in spring. Any road, on the way down from London, the young fella decides to look out the window. Just then a train comes round the bend. Intended husband had his head sticking out like a balloon on the end of a stick. And bash, the train knocks it off. Geoffrey said, "Good God." Feelings do you credit, sir. The headless body falls back onto the lap of the prospective bride, and in no time at all, she's soaked in blood. When the train drew into Southend, they found her cradling the headless body in her arms and singing a lullaby to it. Mad, of course, Geoffrey suggested. There's a hatcher, sir. She had her baby in the loony bin, if you'll pardon the expression. But that's not the end of the story. Geoffrey looked meaningly at the teapot, and the ticket collector obligingly refilled his mug. There's more. There's to be, doesn't there, sir? Otherwise she wouldn't be haunting the 2305 from Fenchurch Street. These things always run to a pattern. 1 year later she got out. Maybe somebody was careless, or maybe she was very cunning. They say mad people are. Anyway, she caught the same train, and at the very spot where her poor young man had his head knocked off, a few seconds before the up train came round the bend, she opens the door and throws herself out. I bet it upset the other passengers no end. That I can believe, Geoffrey observed with deep sincerity. They did not speak again for some time, and Geoffrey was wondering if he could find the courage to climb aboard the next train, when the ticket collector murmured, "I expect you're curious as to how I know that story so pat, sir." Geoffrey shrugged. "I assumed you'd been told." The man chuckled. It was a deep, rich, almost sinister sound. "You're right there. You haven't forgotten a baby, have you, sir? The one she had in the asylum. Well, it grew up and became my old dad, sir." Geoffrey's flagging interest was now fully revived. "Good God, man, that means—" The ticket collector smiled gently. "That's right, sir. The woman in black is my granny. Interesting, ain't it?" Geoffrey looked up at the tall, thin figure, and for the first time noted the pale skin, stretched so tightly over the framework of bones, saw the bright glitter in his eyes, observed the white teeth bared in a near ferocious grin. A long, lean hand that had more than a passing resemblance to a claw reached out and grasped his arm. The deep voice was wistful. "She must come through this old station every night, sir. But never once has she got off to see me. I mean to say, I'm her own flesh and blood. Showing herself to strangers. Gracious me, sir. Are you off, sir?" For a man who had suffered a recent terrible experience, Geoffrey made very good time down the platform and out through the ticket barrier. He now travels to town by Green Line bus instead.